Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. It's Wednesday, November 13th, 2024, and we're going to be answering three questions today that we've been hearing from international educators over the last 7 days. And this is our first roundup since the election, and we'll be going into that in depth in our second question of the day. Before we do that, I do want to say thank you to everybody who watches live here on Wednesday afternoons at 1 p.m. Eastern, and those who watch on repeat on either LinkedIn, YouTube, or Facebook. Thank you for making the roundup a part of your weekly international edification, as well as those that listen to the audio-only podcast version with now over 3,900 downloads. So very excited about the growth of this roundup in reaching our international education profession, going next level in terms of the kind of insights to the questions of the day and how that might impact what we do in international education here in the United States. So as we do each week, we take our three questions that we answer here on Wednesday afternoon from our newsletter that comes out on Monday mornings. And that newsletter is called All the SMIE News Fit to Share. And in case you're curious, SMIE stands for Social Media and International Education Consulting. That's the name of the business. So that newsletter comes out on Mondays at 9 a.m. Eastern if you subscribe to our email version of the newsletter, and you can do that if you haven't already. You can subscribe on our website at smieconsulting.org/subscribe, and I'll drop the link to the website where you can do that subscription, as well as this week's email version of the newsletter, so you can check that out and follow along as we go through these questions of the day. Because we do take the themes that we see developing in our newsletter around some common news stories to go more in depth here on Wednesday, where we see some major issues of the day. And certainly the questions we ask are reflective of those, and you get our hot takes on Monday mornings as to what those news stories are, and links to the stories themselves in the newsletter. And then here on Wednesday, we'll go a little bit more in depth as to how the kind of content we talk about here on Wednesday might help you related to these themes adapt what you do in international ed on your campuses or in your organizations. So let's get right into our first question of the day. And that is, what are agents saying are driving students' decisions in where they go for university and higher education? So this is a kind of a universal question that we always seem to get around this throughout the year, really, whenever there's a different student survey or parent survey or now agent survey that reflects the kind of the underlying themes that we see developing across the industry, responses to government changes, new world events that are impacting what's going on. And these agents are saying, in this survey called Agent Voice that is put out by our friends at ICEF Monitor. It's a yearly survey that now is reaching 1,020 agents in 111 countries. So that's their responses between April and September of this year. So it's a massive survey over a number of months. And they're revealing the top concerns of prospective international students and reflecting the frustrations that they're hearing from students and they themselves experience as they send their students to apply for visas. That there are increasingly frustrations around getting a study visa because of delays, because of costs, because of other challenges, government restrictions that are limiting their ability to even get a visa. And that ultimately, the agents are saying through this survey, is affecting their choices for where they're going to study. So the ease by which a student can now get a visa is quickly rising to the top of the pile that is determining where students will be applying. So what does this tell you? Well, one, it's telling you that students have a lot more choices now, and they're being more open in terms of where they're applying to universities, and not just in only one country. They might be applying to 2 or 3 destinations. Or in this case, you might be hearing from agents that are saying, Well, our students are hearing stories from their seniors that have gone through the process recently about their frustrations about applying for student visas in different countries, not just the US, Canada, Australia, UK, other countries that have changed their visa policies in terms of access to those visas, requirements for the visas, costs of the visas, thresholds that they have. All of these things matter to students, and and if they see more hurdles being put in their place to prevent them to allow them to get that visa eventually, that may be a deterrent to them even considering that country as a destination. So for institutions, this is something that you need to factor into your messaging and explaining the process to your prospects clearly, working with your agent partner so that they understand the process. They may have a sense of what it's like on the ground locally, but you need to be reflecting what the country's levels of support for students is, as well as what you as an institution are doing to help prepare students for that visa process in terms of updating them on the costs and this process and getting them the forms in a timely manner. Because when frustrations in the visa process can be a number of things. Like I said, it can be cost, it can be delays in processing, it could be extra requirements that a student needs to fulfill to be considered for a visa. All of these things can be deterrents. And so it is behooves institutions to be upfront as possible with students in all of your communications. The challenge is some of this is out of your control, particularly if students don't even look at a particular country as an option or as a destination because of the past experiences of their seniors who have just gone through the visa process in recent months or years. So some of what you may see in the future is you see fewer students from certain countries where the hurdles have become too significant, or one of their other major destination choices has made it much easier to apply. We've done in the United States, you've seen it become easier to apply in recent years with the removal of the in-person visa interview for students that have had a U.S. visa, visitor visa, or some other type of visa within the last 5 years. You've seen wait times reduced because that has been a major barrier, reduced significantly in certain countries like India. But we've also seen the opposite. We've seen an increase in visa denials in India this past fall. So is that going to contribute to future delays or future decreases in students applying to us because of denial increases in the fall? Or does that mean fewer will be applying next fall and the spring? What are the realities on the ground? So agents really are not the canaries in the coal mines, but certainly the early warning indicators for us in institutions, not just in the United States, but across the globe, to have a sense of what the issues are that are coming out. So we talked about the visa challenges is at the top of the list, but that isn't the only factor. Affordability and employment outcomes are the most significant pieces that we need to be focusing on in our messaging. So talking about the costs of your institution compared to others in the United States or around the globe, the employment outcomes that your recent graduates having, particularly international graduates. Can you document that? These are the things, the messages we've talked about time and time again here on the Roundup, but it's all coming to a head in terms of the kinds of messages, and it's crystallizing those that agents see from their students that are applying to us and other countries, what the challenges are. And these are not specific to any one market. These are common themes that are driving student choices in terms of where they go if they're studying outside their home countries. So the rise of alternative destinations that have simpler processes because they're trying to compete to take market share away from the big four is happening. So that is a reality on the ground. So these surveys certainly reflect that students are now considering a wider range of countries for their potential study outside of their home country, and their concerns on cost, on employment outcomes, and the visa process. Those are the top three that agents have identified as the most significant barriers to students applying to institutions within a certain country. And there's some things that we cannot do in our messaging to help future students that are already put off before they even think about applying to us or even considering us because of the challenges that we have in our country. So this is something that we just need to be aware of. And for those that where we are working with students who are applying to us, we want to emphasize that those three issues: the visa process to the United States, in our case, the affordability, addressing that in our messaging, and as well as outcomes, employment outcomes for our graduates. So if we can identify at least these three as major themes we need to be addressing at some point in our messaging through social media, through email communication, through posts that we're putting out on our site, having these three areas addressed at some point would be very important preemptive moves to help address student concerns, so that if they do come to your site and find your content, they're able to see that, yes, you're answering the kinds of questions that are most important to them, that will help decide where they are going to apply, which countries they might be applying to. So be aware that the competition is growing. Our share of the pie is shrinking, even though our overall numbers are growing. We need to be aware of what that looks like. And next week, obviously, is Open Doors Week, International Education Week on most campuses around the United States. We're actually having ours at UNLV this week because of conflicts with the F1 race that happens in Vegas next week. So we've decided to move our IEW a week early. So activities are going on this week for us. So IEW is always the national, international version of IEW that the State Department started many years ago, is always kicked off on Mondays by the release of the Open Doors data from the previous academic year, 23-24. We'll get those numbers. We'll also get the fall snapshot survey that IIE does of institutions this fall to see where numbers might be, markers might be going in which direction. So we are expecting an overall increase from the past fall. Fall 23 numbers, and that Open Doors released. And then one thing we are lacking that we normally get around this time of year is the SEVIS by the numbers report. I just checked it the other day, and it's not yet out they usually do, well, I don't think there's anything usual. They were doing a monthly in the spring, but they haven't done one since May. They usually do one around October, or after the fall term has begun, October, November. Usually have something from the fall that we can report on, because that's real-time data on students, FM&J students in the United States currently. So we won't have that, at least right now. Maybe they will release it on Monday as well. Who knows? But that piece of the puzzle we won't have. But Open Doors next week on Monday. Certainly hope you'll be tuning in for that release as well and getting all the news as it features, and we'll certainly be covering that. Probably Thanksgiving week on that Wednesday. We'll probably do do a live on that one, probably covering all the news as a result of IEW. So that's the first question of the day. Now let's move on to our second one, and that is, what will Trump 2.0 mean for international ed in the United States and beyond? So there has always been, and it's no surprise in the international ed community in the United States, does tend to skew more liberal and tends to be having PTSD from the first Trump administration from 2017 to 2021, where some very negative policies were put in place through executive actions, executive orders, particularly the day after inauguration. The Muslim travel bans, quote unquote, were released. They were eventually overturned, but all of that and some other initiatives to potentially cut OPT, to potentially reduce the time that students could be in the United States. There was even a chance to get rid of DS, that students get stamped on their I-20s and their visas. Now, thankfully, those didn't happen. There were other challenges to some international student-friendly policies in the first administration that didn't get approved, or that the courts struck down. Even the travel bans were overturned. So the fear, and this is driven by past experience and just a fear of what 2.0 Trump will mean in terms of immigration policies. We all already know he's talked through the campaign and has already made some initial appointments to Homeland Security. Governor Kristi Noem from South Dakota is going to be the new DHS chief. There's going to be a new border czar, Tom Homan, who used to be over ICE in the first Trump administration. That has had some questionable policies that were implemented then. So there's all sorts of concerns that Stephen Miller is back in the administration as a policy architect or assistant policy chief or whatever it might be. So he's certainly no friend to things international. The question will be, are there lines going to be drawn between what was very clear in all the rhetoric pre-election was about the waves of illegal immigrants that have come through the southern border unchecked for the better part of 4 years, and has led to swathes of problems across the country, particularly in sanctuary cities that have become overwhelmed with these incoming migrants that have been need housing, need food, and are being basically catered to by local governments and with very little help from the federal government. So these new illegal immigrants, new migrants coming. And there are nefarious actors in that mix. A lot of them have come across through coyotes, through that are basically funded by the drug cartels to bring in drugs, bring in people that have less than honorable intent in the United States, criminals, gang members that have flooded into cities around the country. All of this is the negative press that has been flooding the U.S. over the last 4 years. There's no way around that. It's not like you can sweep all those 12 million people under a rug. There have been calls for mass deportation for those that have entered the country illegally in the last 4 years. A rounding up of those people, and there's going to be prioritization for the worst of the worst, the criminals, and then work their way down. There may be sways of self-deportations that people realize they don't want to be caught because the consequences will they've never be able to come back in. So all of this stuff will filter to the top very quickly after Inauguration Day. The hope is, for those that believe that there are some nuggets of truth in some of the things that have been said in some of the rhetoric that's come across, that does tend to focus on illegal immigration, and particularly at the southern border, and that has attracted not just those from Mexico or Latin America, it's from all over the world. They've come through the southern border because they know it's been open the last 4 years. And we don't know where those people are now. That's the problem, and that's where that's why Trump was one of the reasons he was elected, because their current administration had no control and no intention to control the southern border. They had their Border Patrol staff on basically administrative duty for the better part of 3.5 years and not patrolling the border and securing it and doing their main function. The government did not want to do that. And they pay the consequences at the ballot box. Trump was elected largely on that. The impact of the economic recession, the inflationary experience we've had the last few years, all of that has impacted U.S. public opinion, and that led to Trump's election. And it wasn't even close, folks. And that's something we have to get to grips with. The reality is there's going to be a response politically to what's happened in the U.S. Over the last 3.5 years. And part of that is going to be anti-immigrant rhetoric again, but actual policy directives that are going to focus, hopefully, on those challenges with securing the border. And the unfortunate reality is that even the good eggs that did come across, they will be removed, or attempts will be made to remove them because they didn't come through the legal channels properly, and they weren't processed, or they have court dates that will never happen. All of that is the result of the previous administration's policies. So the hope is that, and Trump has had conversations and been asked questions about this in town hall meetings where he was asked by a recent immigrant who had come to the country legally, gone through all the long processes of becoming a permanent resident and eventually a citizen, talking about the differences between legal and illegal immigration in President Trump's eyes. And he made the comment that we need to encourage more legal immigration to the country and he's said in the past that includes students. So there is hope, but I don't think we're viewing this upcoming administration through rose-tinted glasses, but certainly there's nuggets of things that have been said that we can lay our hope in that there will be some distinction, even though the lion's share of the press will be negative, and sadly, this is what happens. Those that have come to the U.S. legally get lumped in with those that have done so illegally. And I don't mind saying illegal and illegal immigrants. That there are rules that govern who can come into the country, how they can come into the country. Those that do not follow the rules are by definition illegal. So that's my opinion. Others will disagree with me, but that's why we live in the country we do. We can have these differences of opinion. I'm one immigrant myself. My family came to the U.S. when I was 5. We went through 6 years on a worker visa for my dad. We then became permanent residents. I had another 6-7 years of that. And then I became a citizen, naturalized citizen, before my 18th birthday. So that was a very long process, almost 13 years for our family, for me to become a citizen from the time that we entered the country. But now, for H-1B workers that come in, have their own waiting list for almost 15-20 years to become permanent residents and citizens. So there's a lot wrong with our immigration system that really hasn't been reformed since the mid to late 1980s. That whether there's a political consensus now that reform can happen, and whether that the cooler heads and sensible heads will affect some real change in Congress, which is where that has to happen. It can't just happen through executive action. Though those are short-term fixes to problems, the real change has to come through Congress. Whether there are cooler heads, more moderate heads that prevail in the Senate to control the tone of those legislative changes that might be happening, that's something we need to certainly be advocating for more than ever as part of our jobs as international educators in the U.S. Working with our government relations offices on campus, advocating through our professional associations like NAFSA and U.S. for Success Coalition, all of the associated organizations that are part of that. So advocacy is going to become even more important. We have to have the success stories that we can point to. We have to have the data that we can share from our students, the real stories of our students and those that are on OPT and the success that they're having, that they're staying, that they're becoming contributing members to society. Immigration folks have had for years the number of CEOs of tech companies that were former international students or migrants to the United States. All of that data is there, but we need to leverage that more than ever to make the case why we need to be doing a better job of supporting our international students and advocating for them and educating the wider population in the United States about these students and how they are not a threat. They are some of the best and the brightest in the world that are choosing to come to our country, to our institutions, because they're quality, because they want to become contributing members of their societies back home, but some of them choose to stay. They come here for that education. We need to be encouraging more of that. So what's next? The last question of the day is, are other countries picking up on what makes the U.S. unique for international students? And this is something that's going under the radar. I haven't seen a lot of folks talking about this recently. And this is something that a couple of different stories this past week popped onto my radar, and they were mentioned in the newsletter. The first of which is about housing in Australia and how that has become one of the main reasons the government introduced the caps that they have now imposed, 245,000 total new international students in 2025, as well as, and of that 245,000, I think 140,000, 45,000 are students going to university level study, and the rest are vocational, English language, secondary schools, and so on. The second article is actually, the first article is actually a YouTube video from ABC News Australia. The second one is out of ISF Monitor that talks about the way forward and what institutions can be doing in these countries that are affected by these government changes in terms of how they focus their attention. And we'll talk about a couple of the recommendations that they came up with that sound awfully similar to how we talk about our approach to international education in the United States, particularly international students. Now, on the ABC News story in Australia, the tone of the article is, in the video is the housing trap squeezing international students. And that part of it is their international students have become one of the targets of growing discontent because there's a lack of affordable housing in the country, the post-COVID surge in migrants to Australia, including overseas students. And again, they're getting lumped in with the migrants that have come in post-COVID. They're blamed for exacerbating the rental crisis. That the government has introduced their caps in direct response to that housing crisis to reduce the number of international students that are able to come in to a cap of 145,000 in 2025 to universities. The universities are obviously strongly opposed. They've become overly dependent on international students for the revenue to support their programs. At some universities, at the University of Sydney, one of the group of 8 in Australia, half of their student body are international students, and that their fees that they bring in are higher than their domestic students, so that allows the universities to do more with what they have. That the legislation is being put in place. So what the legislation is also doing, and this is where the genius, I think, of the motivation is, because as we've talked about before here on the Roundup, the housing crises that are occurring in Australia, UK, Canada, other countries have happened because the campuses themselves have not been working closely with the local communities where these students have to live. The reason that because it's not, that hasn't been a priority concern for the campuses because they don't have the purpose-built housing on campus to house these international students. Very few institutions have the residence hall space to accommodate the international students that come to their campuses. So the resulting communities are the ones that have to absorb all that extra bodies that are coming to the campus from abroad. Coming to that community, not just to the campus, because they don't live typically on the campus. They have to live in local housing in the communities. And those extra students have, in the government's eyes, are putting more pressure on the local communities because the local communities really don't have the bandwidth to accommodate all of these extra bodies. So what is being incentivized in the new legislation, not just putting the caps on, but universities are now going to be incentivized to build housing on campus, student accommodations for these international students. So what does that incentivizing look like? It's the details of which really aren't clear, haven't been made clear in this article, but certainly that's something that sounds, well, that's one of the benefits of the United States. We're primarily residential communities. These institutions in most of the rest of the world aren't residential. They're destinations where people go to study, then they go home off campus for the rest of the week. They might study a little bit on campus, but they're not going to rec centers, they're not involved in student groups or student organizations or going to events on the campus. There isn't that kind of campus community in most, not all, in most institutions around in the Big Four, outside the United States, Big Four destinations. I think Canada's become a little bit more sensitive to this. They're facing similar housing pressures. They've had more of a kind of a moderate approach to making their campuses communities, residential communities. They're moving towards that. I think more campuses will start doing that. And that will erode some of the uniqueness of the United States in terms of that part of the puzzle, that our campuses are able to accommodate residential students and as a priority, whether it's purpose-built dorms for undergraduates, apartments that the university owns that many international students can live in as graduate students. All that needs to be factored into the mix. So it hasn't been lately. That's one thing. The housing incentives that are now being baked into legislation in Australia may be a sign of things to come in other destination markets as well. And the final one, the ICF Monitor article, talks about the way forward, shifting to a more strategic and student-centered recruitment initiative. And one of the first bullet points is focus on student fit. And I have never heard British, Australian, Canadian university reps, when they've given presentations at public events that I've been to, talk about fit, about the importance of fit when recruiting students. That's something that I had baked into me from day one as an admissions counselor at Marquette, where I went to university and then started working right after graduation. That fit, the concept of fit, is hard to measure, but it's one that encourages students to find a university or college as a place where they see themselves fitting in best. That they can apply to a number of colleges and universities, but they should choose the one where they see that they fit in, that are good matches for the campus community life that exists, or the academic academic reputation of the institution, with the goals, all of those things, the support services that they have they might need in terms of mental health, language issues, cultural adjustment, all of those things, having services that are in place to meet those student needs and anticipate those student needs. So these are the kinds of things that we talk about in the U.S. all the time, but in other countries, they are now being emphasized, that better screening leads to better outcomes in terms of how we filter the students that we're recruiting and get to messages that make sense. You're getting your right message in front of the right students that allows you to recruit a better qualified mix of students, not just academically, but socially, culturally, financially, to your institutions. So those are kinds of concepts that the shift from quantity to quality is also another one. What does that look like? Using student personas in your marketing that are being talked about not just in the U.S. but in other countries as well. So these are the things that I'm seeing on the horizon that I think can be significant challenges to our not hegemony we have, but our ultimate success we've had internationally in being the #1 destination for decades for international students. I think that will continue, but that share of the pie is going to get eroded when other countries model their institutions in terms of housing, services, all of these things, and their marketing approach to focus on these things that have been unique features of U.S. higher education. So we'll see what happens. Early doors yet on where that might be going, but other institutions, other countries are picking up on some of those messages that we've been talking about for decades as important in the United States and how we recruit. We'll see if that registers with students as well. That's all we have for you this week on the Midweek Roundup. Thanks again for joining in. Very excited to announce that next Wednesday, November 20th, 2024, will be our 300th episode of the Midweek Roundup. I've been doing this now for 6 years, over 6 years, with some vacations sprinkled in there, a lot of travel that took away a few weeks of the year in terms of the roundups. But over 6 years now, we'll be having our 300th episode. Excited to announce that next Wednesday, November 20th. So please join in, and hopefully we can have a larger group of you be part of the conversation. So thanks for being with us today, and we look forward to chatting with you again in the weeks to come. Cheers.